Hello, everybody. Welcome to our lecture today. We will talk about the power of forgiveness, a very important topic, a very difficult one, but it's the way to free ourselves from the past and live better in the present. So let's try to open our minds to this new approach to forgiveness. For that, we aim on this study to explore the spiritual, the psychological, and the emotional nuances of the act of forgiveness. By situating forgiveness beyond the strictly religious realm, we seek to understand it in its broader and more transformative dimension as a path to inner liberation, emotional maturity, and openness to a more serene and conscious life. Um, Forgiveness, first of all, I brought the summary of the American Association of Psychology. Just a moment, I will remove this from here. Yeah. American Psychological Association. Forgiveness is not forgetting, nor weakness or submission. It is a process of inner liberation. It is the conscious decision not to allow pain, hurt, or misunderstanding to continue to rule our emotional, spiritual, and relational lives. You see, there is a huge difference that sometimes we mix between forgiveness and forgetting things. Or we sometimes think that forgiving others is a weakness from our part. Let's see the spiritual analysis as well. Contemporary psychology shows that forgiveness can be associated with a reduction in anxiety, depression, and emotional suffering, as well as promoting greater psychological well being. So, forgiving is good for us first. But from a spiritual perspective, forgiveness goes beyond personal relief. It is a path of soul maturity. But why is still so difficult to forgive? How many times do we say we forgive, but remain trapped in the memory of the wound? Forgiveness is one of the most repeated words in spiritual traditions, also in general life. But perhaps it is one of the most difficult practices in human life because forgiving touches deep places: wounded pride, desire for justice, fear of being hurt again, need for recognition, and difficulty trusting. All of this is around forgiveness. Jesus did not speak of forgiveness as a beautiful idea, but as a liberating practice. When he teaches, forgive us our offenses as we forgive those who offended us, he invites us to realize that spiritual life is not measured only by prayer, but also by how we treat the wounds we carry. Jesus was not an aesthetic leader or teacher. He was proactive and he was always inviting us to see beyond the boundaries of our own horizons. Forgiving, therefore, is not denying the pain, it is going through the pain without allowing it to transform us into bitter, reactive people or people close to love. The Gospel according to Spiritism has a chapter dedicated to this theme, which is chapter 10, Blessed are the Merciful. And then there is a small part here. If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. This passage reinforces the idea of spiritual reciprocity. We only truly understand forgiveness when we recognize that we also need it. Forgiveness is not passivity, like I said, is an active act. Many people confuse forgiveness with accepting abuse or returning to destructive relationships or pretending nothing happened. But mature forgiveness doesn't eliminate boundaries. On the contrary, it often happens like this. Forgiving requires finally acknowledging the pain, naming what hurt, and choosing a new stance. Forgiving is not saying what you did didn't matter or it didn't hurt. It is saying what happened did matter, but I don't want to live as a prisoner of it anymore. That's the difference. Jesus calls us to meekness, but not to self annihilation. He calls us to mercy, but not to the denial of truth. Forgiving consciously can include distance, protection, dialogue, repair, and rebuilding boundaries. This is the huge difference we many times forget because when sometimes other people hurt us or situations of life are difficult to deal with, we think that if we will forgive, we will forget about that pain or forget about what others did to us. And that's not the case. It's like when Jesus said about loving your enemies, it's not putting these enemies on the same place as you have the friends, but only accepting that they have their limits. You don't desire or wish that they will die or suffer. You only let them live their life and uh, reap what they sow with their attitudes. So forgiving somebody is not forgetting, it's just remembering that you don't want to live with this burden or be a prisoner of this feeling for your whole life. Sometimes the other person moves ahead, lives the life, and forget about everything, and you continue thinking about that for a long time and suffering alone. Human behavior between reaction, defense, and consciousness. A large part of human conflict arises not only from what happens, but from how we react to what happened. Some psychological patterns frequently appear. There we have many of these models and these kind of people around us, even if we don't notice. The reactive type is a person that responds quickly, driven by the emotion of the moment. Then there is another one, which is the controlling type. They try to protect themselves by dominating situations and people. The avoidant type flees from confrontation to avoid feeling pain. The resentful type holds onto the memory of the offense for a long time as proof that they are right. The perfectionist type has difficulty forgiving mistakes, both their own mistakes and others. The wounded caregiver type forgives too much externally, but internally accumulates exhaustion and sadness. These types are not fixed labels, they are mirrors. We can all experience them at different times in our lives. It means we can be more than one of these types, not at once, but in different times and situations. And the people we know sometimes will mix two or three different of these types, but normally there is one of them that is more evident on these people. And you know, oh, this person is a reactive person. This one is a controlling one. This one is resentful or perfectionist or many of them. Uh, the neurodiversity also brings another layer to this case because we have to create a bridge between the act of forgiving, the attitude, and what people do being neurodivergent. To talk about forgiveness in an inclusive way, we need to recognize that people don't feel, process, and react in the same way. The idea of neurodiversity stems from the recognition that human brains function in different ways. There is no single correct way to think, learn, feel, or behave. So there is not only one right way to think, to feel, to learn. There are many different ways, and the soon we recognize that, the soon we live better with the others around us. Conditions as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other forms of neurodivergence can involve differences in communication, emotional regulation, attention, sensory sensitivity, and social interaction. The World Health Organization describes disorders as conditions that arise during the developmental, I always mix this word with French, the developmental period and may involve difficulties in intellectual, motor, linguistic, or social functions. Uh, what means when you think the things are one way, they might be another way. This is very important for broadening understanding before judgment. Sometimes a person seems cold, but it's only overwhelmed. Sometimes this person may seem as indifferent, but haven't been able to express emotion during his life or her life. The person may seem as aggressive, but are only dysregulated, or may seem distant, but are trying to protect themselves from excessive stimuli because it's difficult for them to deal with too much stimuli. May seem as resistant, but need more time to internally organize what they feel. Sometimes people don't even know how to express their feelings or explain something, and we want others to be exactly like we are. And we fight for this and we complain about this. So, this makes the relationships more and more difficult because when we don't remember or recognize the differences between the ways people express themselves, we cannot see them as equals. Forgiveness includes or has to include compassion, and empathy, and humbleness. Because if you don't have compassion for others, or if you don't put yourself on other people's shoes, you will never know that they can be different. Instead of thinking they are cold, you don't imagine how overwhelmed they are inside their heads, trying to deal with so many emotions they don't understand. And that's why they do some things you don't understand at that moment. The connection with the gospel is profound. Jesus looked beyond appearances. He didn't just see the external act, he saw the pain, the ignorance, the history, the limitation, and the possibility of transformation. There is a question on the Spirit's book, question 886, where Kardec presents charity not only as a material assistance, but as a profound moral attitude. It includes benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. In this sense, forgiveness is a high form of charity applied to human relationships. When in Jesus' words, we can see all the emotional maturity that this elevated soul carried. When he says to forgive 70 times 7, we always think it's an absurd. How can I forgive 70 times 7? He's not proposing a mathematical equation for tolerance. He's talking about an inner disposition, not making resentment as a permanent dwelling place. You cannot live your life inside resentment because this makes you a bitter person, a very wounded person, and a person that cannot see beyond uh, E Okay, we came back. It means forgiving this many times means not allowing the evil received to generate permanent harm within us. So it is about us. When we forgive someone, we are not thinking only about the person, but first about us. It means we will not carry that evil or that pain or that bitterness making us suffer constantly. The philosophy of forgiveness leads us to an essential question. Do I want to be right or do I want peace? Often we want both, but at times the soul needs to choose to remain trapped in the inner court or to begin a path of liberation. And here I brought you one of the Jesus conversations that are in the Gospel according to Spiritism and also in the Bible. The teachers of law, let me try to remove this. No. The teachers of law and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before them all. They said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to obtain a basis for accusing Jesus. But him, he was more intelligent than they imagined. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. Since they continued to question him, he stood up and said to them, If any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. He bent down again and continued writing on the ground. Those who heard this went away one at a time, beginning with the older ones. Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Then Jesus stood up and asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she responded, No one, Lord. Jesus declared, Neither do I condemn you. Go now and live your life of sins. Meaning, don't continue doing the same and change yourself and change your life. But it's very interesting in this passage because they say, when they heard Jesus saying, If any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw the stone. And the older ones were the first ones to leave because they had a long life of regrets and they knew very well they were not without sin as anybody is. So he said, if they didn't condemn you, neither do I. This is in this teaching in Matthew's chapter 25, we find a profound warning. Here is the little part of this to continue with the same as I just read. Settle matters quickly with your adversary while you are with him on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, if you will not get out until you have paid, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. In this teaching, he tries to warn us about the reincarnation process. At first glance, the text may seem like just advice of moral or social prudence. Resolve conflicts before they escalate. But in the light of reincarnationist spirituality, it takes on a much broader dimension. The path can be understood as the very evolutionary journey of the soul, as we still walk alongside those with whom we share bonds, debits, wounds, and lessons. In this reading, the adversary is not just someone who opposes us in this life. It can also represent the souls with whom we carry difficult ties from other existences. Relationships marked by pride, abandonment, betrayal, abuse of power, resentment, guilt, or moral violence. These are bonds that remain active in the spiritual realm until they are transformed by awareness, reparation, and forgiveness. That's why he says to the woman, go back to your life and stop what you were doing if you want to change your future. Because if you don't change your behavior, or if you are not uh, learning to make better choices, you will have to pay until the last penny, like the passage in Matthew says. Because if you don't resolve this now, you will have the eternity to come back and be by the side of these people that made you suffer, or the people that you made suffer, to learn something about that. That's why we find so many difficult relationships, and we feel guilt, or we experience different difficult positions in the workplace or in the school, because we always find the same people we knew before. Because we have things to settle, we have to resolve the things before it's too late. And if we can do this during this life, it's much better. Otherwise, we will, like he says, uh, try to resolve your matters quickly, because if you don't, it will take a long time to put all the pieces of this puzzle together, the same people together in the same incarnation, and then try to understand one another and be in different positions, and then solve the problems. And on top of that, on the Spiritist view, there is the obsession process. In Spiritism, these bonds can, in some cases, manifest as obsessive processes. Kardec explains in the Book of Mediums that obsession is a form of persistent spiritual influence, which can present different degrees, from simple obsession to subjugation, which is the total control of the incarnate. That is, it is an unbalanced spiritual connection, often sustained by mental affinity, old grievances, guilt, revenge, or feelings that have not yet been pacified. Note that here is not saying the fault is yours, the fault is on the obsessive companion. The fault belongs to both. There is a spiritual connection, often sustained by mental affinity. We used to say that the obsession cannot happen if we don't open our mental door. So we have to open it by behaving in the same frequency of the influence, or acting in the same way as the spirit trying to influence us is trying to put us, or influencing us to vices or addictions, or uh, talking bad things about others, or being angry all the time, or being negative, pessimist all the time. We have to have affinity with these feelings or behaviors before we are aligned with the obsessor. So these feelings were not yet pacified. We didn't learn how to deal with them yet. Therefore, we still find affinity with the presences. André Luiz, in the book Liberation, deepens this understanding by presenting situations in which incarnate and disincarnate beings remain linked by moral debts, by resentments, and desire for revenge. The book shows that obsession does not only arise from the malice of one spirit towards the other, but often from old, unresolved stories in which both involved still carry marks of pride, of pain, remorse, or a need for reparation. The work in this book also shows that liberation from these bonds requires inner change, first of all, spiritual help, repentance, prayer, service for good, and renewal of feelings. And why we say to be liberated from these bonds, it requires inner change, because in the moment you change your vibration, you start thinking about the good or forgiveness or understanding others or having some more empathy or compassion. This completely changes the energy you are emitting from you. Therefore, it will be completely different from the energy that the obsessor is trying to connect with you. And this is the most powerful thing. That's why the prayer, the good serves for good, or renewing the feelings, having positive thoughts, or learning to meditate and calm yourself and think about options to go ahead in a different way. This completely frees you from the influence because changes your frequency. Let's see. Thus, when Jesus speaks of the possibility of the adversary handing us over to the judge and of being thrown into a prison until we pay the last penny, we can understand this prison as the imprisonment of conscience to the consequence of its own actions. It's us with us. It is not an arbitrary punishment, but an educational law. The soul remains attached to what it has not yet understood, to what it has hurt, to what it hates, to what it fears, or to what it refuses to repair. Jung always said that those things that I resist will persist. This is a concept of psychology, and it's the same concept as we can see here in Spiritism, saying that the soul remains attached to what it has not yet understood. So, if we refuse to grow, if we refuse to understand, if we play victim, if we think we suffer more than others, if we think our life is full of injustices, then we open space to fear, to anger, to a complete unbalanced feeling, and we don't have strength to fight against all these things. We start being depressed and weak and confused and having brain fog and all these things that are very bad for us. So when we try to understand what is going on with me, instead of asking, why did this happen to me? We have to learn to ask, what this is trying to teach me? What's this situation trying to teach me? What did I learn yet that I have to think about and learn with this pain and suffering? From this perspective, many challenges faced in this life, like difficult relationships, inexplicable antipathies, family conflicts, painful repetitions, persistent guilt, or intense emotional patterns, can be understood as opportunities for readjustment. Not all suffering is obsession, and it is important not to simplify human pain. The pain hurts. We have to acknowledge that, not to simplify that. But in the Spiritist reading, some difficult encounters may reveal old spiritual bonds that call for transformation. Therefore, forgiveness has a liberating function. As long as we remain trapped in hatred, resentment, the desire for revenge, or paralyzing guilt, we continue to feed the threads that bind us to past adversaries. Forgiveness does not erase responsibility, nor does it replace necessary reparation, but it alters the quality of the bond. Where there was revenge, understanding begins to emerge. Where there was resentment, learning can arise. Where there was imprisonment, a path to liberation opens. Reconciling while we are on the path is therefore taking advantage of incarnation as a sacred opportunity while there is coexistence, word, gesture, presence, and choice. We can still undo these old knots. We can still transform old adversaries into learning companions, not friends. We can still interrupt cycles of pain that may span many, many, many lifetimes. It can be very difficult to release these links we create with people. You can see in this image that this man is carrying a lot of heavy rocks in his back, and he's putting even more because he didn't learn to let go. And when you don't let go of resentment, for example, or uh, guilt or fear or the sentiment of victimism, you create an imprisonment that is very heavy for you. And sometimes you cannot walk free because you have too many things to carry. A bridge between reincarnation, forgiveness, and spiritual freedom. The prison, which is the third part of Jesus saying there, first there was the adversary, and then there was the judge, and then there was the prison. The prison mentioned in the gospel can be understood symbolically as the imprisonment of the soul to the consequences of its own actions. Remember that we understand the law of cause and effect because we cannot have grapes in the apple tree, or we cannot have roses in a field of wheat. So we understand that we have to live the consequences of our own actions. This is not an arbitrary punishment, but an educational law. Guilt, guilty conscience, persistent resentment, and bonds of enmity, like you feel that the other is your enemy, create needs for reunion, readjustment, and learning. Thus, reincarnation can become the scenario in which the soul returns to pay the last penny, not in the sense of vengeful punishment, but as a process of reparation, maturation, and liberation. It's always like that. Sometimes I understand it's difficult to understand these concepts. They seem maybe too transcendental, but they are so true when we study and learn more about the spiritual way of living and what Kardec brings to us through the spirits and the books uh, that explore these subjects in the romances, in the stories that André Luiz and Divaldo and Joana de Angelis in her psychological series, they bring us another point of view on this because we understand that we have to pay until the last penny, but not because we deserve punishment, not because it's a vengeful act, but this is a process of reparation and liberation. We carry the fluids that connect us to this past. We carry this energy. It's like a mark, like our fingerprints. So if we don't change ourselves and we don't change our way of dealing with things or learn to forgive or try to see things from a different perspective, we will continue on this process until we repair ourselves and the relationships with others. In this sense, forgiveness is one of the great keys to liberation from cycles of trial and expiation, which we have a lot on this earth. As long as we remain bound to the enemy, it doesn't matter if it's by hatred, guilt, the desire for revenge, or painful memories. we remain connected to him or her by invisible threads. Forgiveness cut these threads not because it erases justice, but because it transforms the energy of the bond, like I said before. It changes our level of vibration, it changes the emission we are projecting to the world. Where there was once retribution, there is now learning. Where there was imprisonment, liberation can be born. And then we will move ahead. Forgiveness, therefore, does not mean denying the error, not avoiding reparation. The passage itself speaks of paying the last penny, which indicates that spiritual responsibility remains always. But forgiveness alters the quality of the journey. It prevents reparation from being experienced as condemnation and allows it to become a path of awareness. The difference between this image here, where the person is carrying heavy stones in his back and suffering to move ahead, and here, where this person is walking in a beautiful mountain with a beautiful sun, only with a backpack, is completely different. Maybe the way is the same, the journey is the same, but the quality of the journey completely changed because you are choosing to release this huge weight that you were carrying by the resentment, by the desire of revenge or desire to see the other suffering as well. And you transform your own path, you transform your way ahead, not the others, but yours. From a reincarnationist perspective, many difficult reunions in this life can be understood as opportunities for reconciliation. Parents and children, couples, siblings, work colleagues, or people who deeply challenge us may be former adversaries reunited by divine mercy, not to repeat the pain, but to transform it. And sometimes reincarnation in this view is not just a return to the body, but it is also a return to unlearned lessons. And forgiveness is one of the highest forms of learning without having to endlessly repeat the pain. And sometimes in a relationship or in a work relationship or inside the family with our siblings, one of them evolve and learn and see the world in a broadened way and study and improve in different ways, and the other is stationary. The other is there, just living the life in the material realm. And then the separation or the distance starts to grow between these people. They came together to try to learn or do the best they could, but at some point, if one decides to evolve and the other stays in the same level, then the distance starts to grow, and many times the way will be separate from that moment on. So, when we learn to forgive, we have to understand that not everybody develop in the same way. Not everybody grows the same way because not everybody sees things the same way, like we mentioned before. Not only the neurodivergent people, not only autism or ADHD, but people in different stages of evolution, they will see things in a different way. They will not be able to see things in the same perspective as you see many times. And this also deserves forgiveness because you cannot force the person to evolve. You cannot expect from the other person what they are not able to give you yet because they don't even know what's the difference. They cannot see with your eyes. That's the most difficult thing to do in a relationship. And then there is another one which is very important and we forget many times, which is self-forgiveness. From a spiritual perspective, much guilt stems from the awareness of having failed. This is very bad for us. From mistakes we made, from words that hurt that we said, from choices that brought suffering to others in this life, or according to this reincarnationist view, in previous experience of the soul. In some religious traditions, this guilt is associated with the idea of sin. In Spiritism, it can be understood as a sign of the conscience awakening to the need for reparation and growth. But when guilt ceases to be a call for transformation and becomes inner condemnation, it loses its educational function and begins to imprison us, which means that being aware of our mistakes is different of feeling guilt all the time. We have to forgive ourselves because we as well are on the way to evolution. We have a lot of things to fix in ourselves. We have a lot of rough edges that will make others suffer, even if we don't notice. And we have to understand that when our conscience starts to awaken, then we understand that we have to fix some things we did wrong. But if we don't pay attention to it, okay, we made a lot of mistakes. We have said words that hurt a lot or made things that made others feel bad, but we cannot condemn ourselves without understanding that we are still learning. And for sure, we did the best we could at that moment. At that moment, we didn't know the same we know now. Or in the future, we will know things we don't know now. And we have to understand that this person is always changing, is a constant metamorphosis, walking and learning and studying and trying to improve and going back to zero and start again and falling and then waking up. That's the process of learning and evolving. We cannot expect a straight line. We have lots of ups and downs in our lives with ourselves, with our learning process, and with others as well. There's also the feelings of guilt that don't stem from real mistakes. They come from old wounds, from childhood traumas, from rejections, from humiliations we suffered, for emotional abandonment, even if it was a feeling of abandonment, not a real abandonment, but the emotional abandonment sometimes has the presence of the parents or the family, but you feel alone or through excessive demands from parents that are perfectionists and made their children live through hell, expecting them to be perfect when they are not able to be. Sometimes limiting beliefs, such as I'm not good enough, or I'm guilty of everything, or I don't deserve to be loved, or I need to punish myself to be forgiven. These all can stem or can grow from our past traumas, from rejections. And remember that the traumas we bring are not only from this life and the childhood we had in this life. Sometimes we bring very, very old traumas that take a long time to be healed. Often the person matures, understands life better, but continues to treat themselves with the harshness they learned in the past. You may no longer be that person, but you still treat yourself as if you were. Forgiving yourself is not denying responsibility, nor erasing the consequences of your own actions. It is recognizing that responsibility without love becomes self punishment. And self punishment does not regenerate anyone. only paralyzes. The spiritual path does not ask for eternal condemnation. It asks for awareness, reparation, learning, and transformation. This is the best things we can do to be better tomorrow than we were today. Self forgiveness is born when the soul ceases to identify with the mistakes and begins to cooperate with God in its own new beginning. As Jesus always said, go and don't do the same mistake again. He didn't cure people or heal people because he was special, but because he understood that sometimes you are not that thing. You are at that moment, you are being like that. But this doesn't define you. So he gives us many chances, or as many chances as we need to change and evolve. So never think about eternal condemnation for anything that you think you did wrong. The transformation starts with the self-forgiveness. When you stop to connect yourself to the mistake you did and start to be open to the paths that God shows you through many opportunities or situations that you start living that will make you experience new things. And for everything that you think is bad or is a suffering or is a torment, I can guarantee that something good will arise from that, because life in the pedagogical way of God teachings is not here, or suffering is not here to punish us, but to help us learn fast. And the faster we learn, the faster the suffering will stop, because that's the purpose of suffering, learning. Forgiveness as a process, not as an instant act. We have to remember this. It's very important, because when we say about forgiveness, we think that is just, okay, I forgive this or I forgive myself, and that's not true and it's not possible. It's a process that you have to redo many, many, many times. No one needs to pretend they have forgiven, nor violate their own feelings to appear spiritually evolved. This is nonsense. True forgiveness can go through stages. First, you will acknowledge the pain, yours or what others caused to you. Then you will name the wound. You will recognize I'm feeling fear, or I'm feeling guilty, or I'm feeling abandoned, or I'm feeling hurt, or I have resentment, whatever. You have to give a name and be honest with yourself. Next, you will understand the impact this is causing in your life. Then you separate the person that made you suffer from the act. You will understand that this person did what she or he thought it was right. It's not right for you, but this person has a reason to do what she's doing or he's doing. Or at least she doesn't know better how to do differently. Later, you choose not to nurture the resentment towards the person or towards yourself. And finally, when possible, you transform this experience into learning. Then it comes another layer. The psychological research on forgiveness interventions indicates that structured forgiveness processes can foster hope, self-esteem, and a reduction in emotional symptoms in some contexts. This confirms something that spirituality has already emphasized a long time ago. Forgiveness needs a path, not nor just a moral one, but a plan. You have to change some behavior, you have to change some choices, and you have to change the way you see things. In this book, André Luiz has this beautiful book. There is a chapter, uh, Answers from Life, where he says He offers us a profound image by stating that indulgence washes away the poisons of guilt. This also applies to ourselves. Often we are harsh on our past selves, forgetting that responsibility without love becomes self punishment. We have then some ways and choices to live better. We can propose 5 paths. Let's see. Replace judgment with inner investigation. Start asking yourself questions. Before asking, why is this person like this? You can ask, what does this situation awaken in me? It's important to have a diary or a journal where you can write these things when you suffer something that is very intense. And you can talk to yourself without boundaries, without shame, without guilt. You can just write there and even throw away afterwards. But when you remove the words only from your brain and put them in paper, it changes completely the way you see things, I guarantee. The second way it can be differentiate forgiveness from reconciliation. Forgiveness can happen in the inner self. Reconciliation requires security, trust, change, and responsibility from both parties. So if you don't feel secure, or if you don't trust this person, you cannot reconciliate, and that's okay. It's a choice. But you can forgive him because this is inside you. It's the liberation between you and the problem that is making you suffer and causing you pain. Third, learn to communicate boundaries. This is very important for us, especially for women. A loving boundary can be stated like this: I want to maintain respect between us, but I cannot accept this form of treatment. Learning to say no is a very difficult art, and you can say no, or you can uh, show your um, not agreement with some things and some situations without being aggressive. You can learn to say, no, this is not good for me, and I don't want to do that, or I want to do differently, or I want to keep the respect between us, but I will not accept that you treat me like that. This is a true liberation when we learn to do this. Recognizing personal patterns. Ask yourself those patterns we talked about before. Do I run away when I face a difficult situation? Or I attack? Or I try to control? Or I remain silent? Or I dramatize? Or I negate myself? When you learn to recognize your patterns, you also can work on yourself to improve yourself or to change the ways you react to things. And this many times will avoid bigger conflicts with others. Because maybe you want to control everything or to have the answers for everything. Or maybe you attack and don't let the other speak and try to justify yourself all the time. And this is many times the origin of many conflicts. You have to ask yourself, how do you react to things? And then you have to try to improve yourself, not the others. And finally, practicing compassion with discernment. Compassion without limits becomes self abandonment. It's not to accept everything coming from the other because you want to be compassive. Limits without compassion become harshness. Maturity lies in uniting the two. You have to establish the limits, otherwise, you will be abused by the others. And you also have to have limits with compassion, because if not, you will be very harsh on you and in the others, with the others too. It is important to distinguish pity from compassion. Pity looks at the pain of another and often unintentionally reduces them to their own fragility. So, when you have pity of somebody, you don't think this person is capable of improving. When you have compassion, looks at the same pain, but also recognizes the dignity, the history, and the possibility of reconstruction of that soul. Pity might say, poor thing, and then compassion says, I see your pain, but I also see your potential strength. When you have compassion, you give the person the power to change their lives. When you only have pity, you just don't believe that person can improve. And you don't help this person by being pity on her. In Spiritism, this understanding is close to the moral charity taught by Kardec: benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. Compassion is not allowing everything, nor justifying error. It is uniting mercy and discernment. It is understanding without condoning. It's welcoming without negating oneself, and forgiving without losing awareness of necessary limits. This is a very beautiful way of seeing things, because Spiritism invite us to have the moral charity, which includes benevolence, forgiveness, indulgence. And when we are compassionate beings, we can see others in their own dimension, with their own limits and capabilities, and not try to change the others to be the same as us. So we unite mercy and discernment. We can try to change others. That's impossible. But when we have only mercy and, oh, okay, poor thing, or this person is not capable of doing different, but you don't have discernment, then you will expect this person to do things they are not able to do yet. And then who will suffer? Not the person, but you, because you are expecting more than it's possible to get. Um, to forgive is to return the soul to the movement of life. While we hold on to resentment, part of our energy remains trapped in the past. This is something that we not often know. If we carry the resentment, part of our energy that could be used to build a future or to make our life better now or to be happy, it remains trapped in the past. The body moves on, but the routine continues. Life goes on, but an intimate part of you remains facing the same scene, repeating the same pain, seeking a reparation that may never come in the way you expect. Jesus taught us forgiveness because he knew that resentment makes us spiritually ill, not because the pain is small, but because the soul is much, much, much greater than the pain. So, to forgive is to say, I do not deny what happened, but I choose not to be defined by it. I acknowledge my wound, but I will not make it my dwelling place. I embrace my story, but I allow God to lead me beyond it. And perhaps that is the great power of forgiveness, not to change the past, but to live the present and liberate